This week, I'm going back in time again, to an era of games I'm much more familiar with. Don't get me wrong, I love new games too, but they don't have the charm of older 8 and 16-bit games. But that's my personal opinion, and if I'm going to keep on that, I'll veer off topic and never get to this week's review, which happens to be Legend of the Ghost Lion. Believe it or not, this was the first RPG I've ever played. Lucky me. I enjoyed it when I was like 12, but when I came back to it recently, I realized that it's not much more than a mediocre adventure game. For one, there's really a lack of story. It starts off with the main character's parents telling Maria about a legend of a white lion, and how a bunch of people lost their lives attacking it, except one soldier who threw a spear and hit it. Apparently, it was so dangerous that, although the lion retreated into a cave, the parents were going on a trip to, quote, solve the mystery. Of course, the parents disappear and Maria sets off with the fabled spear that wounded the lion, which supposedly holds the spirit of the soldier. With this spear, the elders gave their blessing on Maria, if that's worth anything, and she heads towards this cave of evil to meet up with the lion and destroy it. It's a very vague story, and that's really all you get for the majority of the game. The only additions to it are the side quests, and only those are necessary to either procure an item or weapon to continue on through the game. My question is, why are these elders sending a little girl to fight a frickin' lion? Makes no sense to me, unless she's the village idiot and they see this as the chance to get rid of her. Anyway, the first cavern you enter, you'll find a few things. You'll find a key, a lamp which houses in essence a magical genie, and a dagger. This genie is your primary spellcaster for the majority of the game, so you may use him frequently. But before I get too carried away, you continue on and a bridge falls apart as Maria is standing on it. So she falls in the water and gets swept away. Maria then wakes up near a pond with fairies flying near it, and tell you to find these ponds in your journey. You've probably already figured out that Maria is in a literal dream world. Mainly because in battle, your level is denoted as hope, your health is courage, and your magic power is dreams. Before I explain those a bit, let me drone on about the story a bit more. As I said, you don't really get any more of a plot line. You're just told to go after the white lion. Most of the time, the game progresses in standard RPG form, where you continue on until you hit a roadblock, figure out how to remove that obstacle, and then continue on. For the most part, the game's roadblocks are all removed by defeating a boss and procuring an item that removes the roadblock. Occasionally, the boss is a roadblock, so defeating it will allow you to pass. At first, the game isn't too confusing, since much of it is linear, but at one point you'll reach a giant continent with multiple towns and dungeons. I'm all for exploring in RPGs, but there's a reason why it's not as useful in this game. I'll explain that shortly. But these large landmasses often give you very little direction, so it's up to you to figure out exactly where you're supposed to go to get to next. Get it wrong? And it's a long journey back to town to heal up. So let me explain a few things. First, you don't get experience points after battles. Instead, you just get rubies, which of course are the currency of the game. Actual necessity of rubies are limited. You'll use it sparingly to purchase better weapons and also to buy bread and tears. Bread restores HP, or courage, and tears dreams. Also, when you fail, you'll lose half of your rupees, just like many other RPGs of its time. This isn't a huge issue though, since rubies are gained easily through combat, and you'll be fighting a lot. Here lies the main issues with Legend of the Ghost Lion. The encounter rate is extremely high, often forcing you to battle every 3 or 4 steps. At least, this is how it seems. As I said, you don't get experience points when fighting. Instead, level ups are obtained by finding fragments of hope. Almost every dungeon has at least one, and sometimes 2. Finding these completely restores your courage and dreams, and raises their maximums. But since this is your only way of leveling up, fighting all the time is just a waste of time unless you need rubies. Which, you probably don't. Let me talk about combat for a bit, and then I can explain the flaws with the level system. Maria always starts off the fight alone, which can cause problems all in itself, especially since monsters do massive damage later on in the game, and can usually sneak in a hit before you can properly protect yourself. But that's besides the point. In order to make the fight a bit more fair, you can summon magical beings from items that you may have found. For example, summon the warrior Mojo by selecting the spear, or the wizard Tuana from the lamp. You can summon as many allies as you want, provided that the ally hasn't already been called that battle, or you have enough dream power to call them. These allies have power meters of their own. If you have an ally attack normally, it drains 20 power from them, and casting spells each has their own power cost. This power is also their health, so if an ally gets attacked, it gets subtracted from your power. If the summon's power gets to 0, the ally disappears and cannot be called again for that fight. It's a very simple system to have. Chances are you'll be summoning your allies in every battle. The battle itself takes place in normal RPG fashion. Each participant takes one move. Most of your enemies will attack Maria regardless on whether you have called any allies or not. In order to attack, you have to select a weapon. In order to protect yourself, you choose a defensive item, like the blue ring. This is the only way to truly defend, as there is no armor in the game. It's really lousy if you ask me, because it makes fights a bit tougher when you have to forfeit a turn just to equip a defensive item. In fact, the item Aura is almost required because it nullifies spells casted towards you, and this is only found at the end of the game. Otherwise, you'll be taking hits of 70 to 80 points when you only have a max life of about 600. Another quirk with the battles that makes it purely frustrating is that in the second half of the game, it seems like your attacks miss the enemy 75% of the time. In the early parts of the game, you're hitting enemies with no issues. Hit a certain point and this just seems to change. You'll eventually find an item that's called Rope, which is supposedly enchanted to bind an enemy and not allow them to move. It's helpful early on because it allows your enemies to become completely useless and allows you to get free hits in. But later on, the rope misses more often than not, so it, like many other items, becomes useless. Your summoned beings also have the ability to defend. Some of these summons are primarily defensive ones with lousy attack power. Honestly, don't bother calling these guys out. Although you can choose a defense option, when Maria gets hit, the allies' power drops, but Maria still takes the full hit. I don't know if this is a glitch or not, but the defensive option for summons is completely useless. The other strange thing about summoning is that every time you level up, the costs of your summons are increased as well. Say it takes 3 dream points to summon Moja. When you find a Fragment of Hope, this may raise to 5. Sure, Moja gets stronger and you do get more dream points, but is it really necessary to increase the cost of summoning your pals? It just seems like it's not worth it to increase your dream points then. Maybe the Fragment of Hope should just be increasing your courage points? It doesn't make any sense to me. Because of the fact that there are no experience points to level you up, and there's so many battles, fights really start to become repetitive. It goes like this. You enter a fight, you activate a defensive ability and take a quick hit. You then start summoning a few beings to assist you in the fight. The battle ends, take a few steps, and enter another fight. Repeat this about a dozen times before you reach a dungeon, and then it just goes to repeat again. If there were experience points awarded, it would make all this grinding make sense. But alas, there's not, so it's just something to kill time. Another issue with this is that there's really only 2 healing items I mentioned earlier. Sure, every fairy spring has an NPC that will fully heal you free of charge, and these also double as save points. But that bread and tears, it's all you get. I've never had a need to use the tears, but the bread I used quite a bit. Near the end of the game, it's almost necessary to max out your inventory with the bread. This is because regardless of whether you're level 1 or 20, bread only heals 50 courage points. At level 25, your courage is at 650. It means if you were at 100 courage, you would need 11 loaves of bread to fully heal. If I recall correctly, you get 32 inventory spots, and many of those are taken up by your weapons, defensive items, quest items, and the pieces needed to summon others. That takes up close to half your inventory. And if you think you're going to be able to run away a lot when you don't need the rubies, think again. Running away is rarely successful, and of course if the escape attempt fails, you're taking extra damage. The graphics and sounds aren't really too great. The battle music never changes, save for the final boss music. It's really not a bad song, but it does get old fairly quickly. There's also not much of a selection while you're on the field or even in dungeons. None of it is really going to be memorable. As for the visuals, monsters don't look too bad. There's some decent detail put to them, and when they die, it's actually a pretty cool effect. One little catch is that some of the summons have weird scaling issues to them. Some of them it only shows their head, and then some of them shows their entire body. That's just minor though. The NPCs have some weird looks to them. Thankfully, the character that you play as looks decent enough. The dream world is an interesting idea for an RPG world, but it's not really fleshed out too well. Other than the fancy creatures you encounter, you don't really see anything out of the ordinary, except for possibly the villages on top of towers. Everything else just seems like a normal environment. Seems like somebody dropped the ball on this potential. There's also some other oddities with the game. It likes to repeat things, especially in combat. When you paralyze someone with the rope, you'll constantly be told that the enemy cannot move, even though you've already known that for the past 5 turns. The best example of this, however, would be what would be considered the 3-way deadlock part of the game. At one point, you encounter a Hydra-style monster. In order to defeat it easily, you need to summon the giant frog and the giant slug in a specific order. Basically, each of them scares another, so all 3 of them stare at each other while you're free to hit it without consequence. Of course, in the middle of your hits, the game constantly reminds you that the 3 of them are deadlocked. and it says this once for each of the 3, so you'll be reading it 3 times per turn. What's the point of this? Once would be more than enough. I think after 1 time, you get the point. Although it's not really important, I gotta talk about the box art. I know, that's a rarity for me, but I would just kinda consider it to be sort of misleading. It features a girl that actually looks like a warrior with a lion just sitting calmly next to her. Maybe it's me, but this just looks kinda strange, especially since Maria looks nothing like this portrayal. It's just my 2 cents. Finally, you do manage to find the white lion after a lot of searching. The battle is the hardest fight in the game, bar none. It has the ability to one-hit kill any of your summons, and you'll be needing to constantly call them so you can focus more on healing. Why would you need to heal? Well, let me put it to you this way. Most of the enemies in this area do about 70 to 80 points of damage. The lion? It does about 200 points with a single hit. So in between calling your allies, you'll probably be scarfing down bread like it's going out of existence. And this doesn't even really help too much. Somehow, I was able to defeat the lion on the first try, but it was really coming down to the line. I'm not going to waste my time talking about the ending because it's a mound of crap. It tries to be motivational, but it's one of those moments where you just shake your head and think to yourself, wow, I just endured hours upon hours of this game for that. Legend of the Ghost Lion had potential, but unfortunately it falls short. The dream world isn't fleshed out as much as it should, and the level system, although unique, is flawed. It's worth a try just for the unique features, but honestly, I would say after playing for a few hours, you'll get the gist of what little of a story the game has, and not need to finish the whole thing. Final score? 5 out of 10. This is Reaper. Check me out on Facebook, facebook.com/ReapersReviews. Happy fragging.